We're fighting people, the Ayatollah and his son, who did not fall far from his father's tree. They're religious Nazis. Nobody believed Hitler wanted to kill all the Jews and create a master race. They were wrong to miscalculate Hitler. They do not want peaceful nuclear power. They want a bomb to purify Islam, to destroy the state of Israel, and come after us. When this regime goes down, we're going to have a new Mideast. We're going to make a ton of money. Nobody will threaten the Straits of Hormuz again. But Donald J. Trump saved the world from real chaos.
U.S. military officials say 3 service members have died and 5 were injured following the launch of the U.S. and Israel military campaign against Iran. Now, the service members were stationed in Kuwait, one of many U.S. allies targeted in the region following the strike Saturday morning. Iran vows for revenge following the death of its supreme leader, but one of the questions many are asking is who will assume leadership of Iran and when?
What happens when a senator stops doing polite Washington theater and starts talking like a prosecutor? That's the energy behind the viral framing of this story. Senator destroys right-wing war hawk Lindsey Graham. But the real story is bigger than one clash. It's about how Sheldon Whitehouse has built a political style around one simple move. Take the loudest talking points on the right, then answer them with documents, hearing testimony, ethics records, and budget math. Lindsey Graham becomes the headline because he's one of the clearest symbols of interventionist Republican politics. But Whitehouse's broader target is a whole ecosystem: war rhetoric abroad, ethical impunity at home, and climate denial dressed up as fiscal seriousness.
Thank you, Chairman. We are here today because the Supreme Court is playing out of bounds of the ethics rules for federal judges. Justices read the ethics rules in unique and eccentric ways, and when they're caught out of bounds, they refuse to allow any investigation of the facts. The personal hospitality problems I've been pursuing began with Justice Scalia, who took more than 7 dozen undisclosed hunting vacations. Most people know of 2, the one where he was on the Air Force Two manifest with Dick Cheney, and the one where he died. There were 70 plus more. It was systematized. Some intermediary would ask the owner of an expensive resort, often a commercial property, to extend to Scalia a personal invitation to the resort. Even where the owner was someone he'd never met, Scalia treated as personal hospitality because of the personal invitation and failed to disclose the vacations. Gun industry advocates, fossil fuel folks, and Republican political figures often tagged along. No reasonable reading of the term personal hospitality would cover this, but the Supreme Court let this go on for years. When I challenged the court about this practice, Exhibit 1, I got a blow-off letter, Exhibit 2. Basically, nothing to see here. So then I asked the circuit courts what they thought about this conduct. I went 0 for 13 on answers. Oh, that would be Exhibit 3. I went 0 for 13 on answers, so I then sent another letter saying I hope their silence didn't indicate some kind of coordinated obstruction. Exhibit 4. I also scheduled a subcommittee hearing. Presto, I was told the Financial Disclosure Committee would examine how the exemption was interpreted. That's Exhibit 5. Almost a year later, 2 weeks before the recent news about Justice Thomas broke, the Judicial Conference updated its guidance to clarify that this sort of non-disclosure violates the law, Exhibit 6. I have no evidence that any federal judge outside the Supreme Court ever used the personal invitation trick, and the Judicial Conference, made up of other judges, firmly shut it down. Regular judges would be loath to use that trick because a complaint about it would go into a proper process and would be investigated and measured against the law and the ethics code, and a conclusion would be reached, and that conclusion could be embarrassing. Only Supreme Court justices refuse to allow their conduct to be investigated or reviewed. My bill would fix that. Here's an example of the no investigations problem. The key fact to determine whether Justice Thomas was bound by law to recuse himself from the first January 6th committee case was what he knew about his wife's insurrection activities and when he knew it. On that fact, the lawfulness of his initial recusal decision turns. Yet Thomas has never been officially asked that question. It's a cover-up in plain view. The Supreme Court alone among federal courts is okay with that. My bill would fix that. Which brings us to Justice Thomas's recent non-disclosure of supposed personal hospitality from a right-wing billionaire and its problems. First problem, private jet travel is not in the personal hospitality exemption, which is limited to food, lodging, and entertainment. Exhibit 7. Some textualist, by the way. Second problem, Thomas said it was okay because he'd asked colleagues. But that financial disclosure committee, it's there to ask about financial disclosure. Setting aside that its name should give a clue, Thomas knew the committee existed because concerns about his yacht and jet travel gifts from this billionaire were referred there in 2011, after some of these gifts were first revealed in this New York Times story, Exhibit 9. Third problem, there's no legal way not to disclose the property acquisition in Georgia. Fourth problem, some of this personal hospitality involved people dedicated to turning the court into a tool for right-wing billionaires, namely Leonard Leo. This guy doesn't have business before the court, his business is the court. This disclosure mess has again been referred to the Financial Disclosure Committee, which raises the question of the previous referral to that same committee of the same billionaire's gifts to Thomas of yacht and jet travel. The rules seem to require the committee to report its findings to the Judicial Conference. The records of the Judicial Conference are public, and the records of the Judicial Conference contain no mention of any such report. So what became of the 2011 referral? Did anyone intervene? Is the committee still considering the 2011 referral more than a decade later? There is much yet to learn, which is why last week I sent a letter to the courts asking for further answers. Exhibit 10. 3 things are needed to fix all this: better enforcement, better recusal rules, and better disclosures. My bill would do all 3. I thank Chairman Durbin for this joint hearing and look forward to getting to the bottom of this mess. Until there is an honest ethics process at the Supreme Court, these messes will continue. The court has conclusively proven that it cannot police itself. Nemo judex in sua causa. I ask unanimous consent that my exhibits be made part of the record.
Why does Lindsey Graham fit so neatly into this frame? Because in recent coverage, Graham has repeatedly surfaced as one of the most aggressive public advocates for confrontation with Iran, and that has made him a lightning rod far beyond Democratic media. Reuters even reported blowback from Trump's own MAGA base over possible Iran escalation, while highlighting Graham's rhetoric, including his remark that military action could be the best money ever spent. In another clip, Graham is shown speaking about war with Iran in language critics seized on as chillingly transactional. That's why this doesn't read as abstract foreign policy anymore. To White House-style critics, it reads as a familiar Washington habit: moral certainty up front, public costs later.
When this regime goes down, we're going to have a new Mideast. We're going to make a ton of money. Nobody will threaten the Straits of Hormuz again. But Donald J. Trump saved the world from real chaos. Can you imagine a year from now? What would it cost America if Iran had 11 nuclear bombs to threaten us? They would hold us hostage. We would be held hostage in perpetuity by this terrorist regime. So the money we're spending is a good investment to take down a regime that's been the largest state sponsor of terrorism, has got American blood on its hands. And when this regime falls, it's not if, when. We're going to have a gateway to peace. And the next thing that will happen is Saudi Arabia will recognize Israel. And that will be the biggest change in 2,000 years in the Mideast. And Donald J. Trump is the man to make it all happen.
The United States has a growing internal threat that must be dealt with, and his name is Senator Lindsey Graham. This guy is a homicidal maniac, as I said yesterday, in my opinion, that President Trump apparently loves and listens to, which is a grave threat to us all. And while President Trump is all over the map on potential timing to end the war in Iran, or the, quote, little excursion, as he's now calling it, there is reporting that some of his advisors are now pushing to find an off-ramp, understanding that with rising oil prices and gas prices and sentiment in the United States, the majority is against this war. Republicans are for it, but independents are overwhelmingly against it. And of course, Democrats are too, but independents matter for the midterms. Many think this is not worth it. We got some gains, now let's get out. The Wall Street Journal reporting some of Mr. Trump's advisors are privately urging him now, please look for an exit plan amid these oil prices and concerns that political backlash is heading Republicans' way. Now the White House calls the reporting, quote, full of crap from anonymous sources. Okay, but there's no question that spiking oil prices, yesterday it went to, at one point, I think $120 a barrel. And then Trump, right before the markets closed, said, oh, we may be ending the conflict, sending the price going back down. Now he's being accused of market manipulation. But all of this will be a concern. There's no question consumers are already struggling with inflation, and affordability, so-called, has been their number one issue for a long time. And we do not want people's gas prices, and oil prices affect all prices, to be going up prior to the midterms. There are reports that top Republicans in difficult races in November have been calling the White House saying, please find a way out. This is not going to be helpful.
How many people live in Iran, by the way?
I don't know the population.
At all?
No, I don't know the population.
You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple?
How many people live in Iran?
92 million.
Okay. Yeah,
How could you not know that?
I don't sit around memorizing population tables.
Well, it's kind of relevant because you're calling for the overthrow of the government.
I am not the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran.
You're a senator who's calling for the overthrow of the government.
You're the one who
don't know anything about the country.
No, you don't know anything about the country. You're the one who claims they're not trying to murder Donald Trump. You're the
I'm
one
not saying that.
who can't figure out if it was a good idea to kill General Soleimani, and you said it was bad.
You don't believe they're trying to murder Trump.
Yes, I do.
Because you're not calling for military strikes against them in retaliation. And if you really believe that...
We're carrying out military strikes today.
You said Israel was.
Right, with our help. I said we. Israel is leading them, but we're supporting them.
Whitehouse's real power move is that he rarely leaves a story sitting in just one lane. He doesn't treat foreign policy bravado, court scandals, and climate politics as separate worlds. He treats them as symptoms of a political culture that expects the public to stop asking follow-up questions. That's exactly the tone he brought into the Senate judiciary fight over Supreme Court ethics. In one of his most quoted lines, Whitehouse said, "We are here today because the Supreme Court is playing out of bounds of the ethics rules for federal judges. The court has conclusively proven that it cannot police itself." That line landed because it reframed the issue. This wasn't gossip about judges. It was an argument that one of the most powerful institutions in the country had fallen outside the rules it expects everyone else to obey.
The highest court in the land should not have the lowest ethical standards.
Democratic lawmakers in the U.S. Senate on Tuesday called for legislation that would set new ethical standards for justices on the U.S. Supreme Court. This comes amid revelations that Justice Clarence Thomas, one of the 6 conservatives on the bench, had reportedly received but never disclosed gifts and travel from a Texas billionaire and Republican donor. Dick Durbin is the Democratic chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Last month, we learned about a justice who for years has accepted lavish trips and real estate purchases worth hundreds of thousands of dollars from a billionaire with interest before the court. That justice failed to disclose these gifts and has faced no apparent consequences under the court's ethics principles.
We can talk about ethics, and that's great, but we're also going to talk about today of a concentrated effort by the left to delegitimize this court and to cherry-pick examples to make a point.
But Republicans sought to cast the effort to require greater disclosure from the justices as a left-wing plot to delegitimize a conservative court and its decisions. Here's Republican and ranking committee member Lindsey Graham.
This is not about making the court better. This is about destroying a conservative court. It will not work.
None of the 9 justices appeared at the hearing, with Chief Justice John Roberts last week declining an invitation by Durbin for him to testify. Supreme Court justices are not bound, like other federal judges, by the same code of conduct adopted by the broader federal judiciary. Other federal judges under that code must avoid even the, quote, appearance of impropriety. Witnesses invited by Democratic lawmakers told the panel Tuesday that gap meant a dearth of oversight and accountability. Kedrick Payne is a lawyer specializing in government ethics.
There are 4 basic ethics provisions that exist in the executive and legislative branches that do not exist in the Supreme Court. As a result, the Supreme Court has the lowest ethical standards in government.
But Republican witnesses claimed that a proposed bill imposing ethics standards on the Supreme Court would be an unconstitutional imposition by one branch of government on another. Here's attorney Thomas Dupree.
It is the Supreme Court, not the Congress, that has the prerogative under our constitutional structure to decide whether to adopt a code of conduct that governs themselves.
Two senators, Independent Angus King, who caucuses with Democrats, and Republican Lisa Murkowski, introduced legislation on April 26th that would require the Supreme Court to create a code of conduct and appoint an official to review ethics complaints. With Republican opposition expected, any such legislation faces an uphill battle in a divided Congress.
And Whitehouse had evidence ready. His side of the argument was fed by a stream of reporting, especially ProPublica's investigations into Justice Clarence Thomas. Those reports detailed undisclosed luxury travel funded by GOP donor Harlan Crow, and later chronicled the court's first ever ethics code, arriving only after the scandal had exploded into public view. Whitehouse's press materials also laid out allegations about undisclosed trips tied to Justice Scalia, and argued that the court had spent years brushing off oversight. So when he talks about corruption or capture, he isn't relying on vibe. He's stacking investigative journalism, committee exhibits, and official letters into a narrative the audience can actually follow. That's part of why these moments travel online. Viewers can feel when a politician is riffing, and they can feel when someone came with a binder.
So these are three new titans of industry. There's Tony Novelli, who's an oil baron from St. Louis, David Sokol, the former heir apparent of Berkshire Hathaway, and Wayne Huizenga, who is the man behind Blockbuster, AutoNation, and Waste Management.
Diane, it actually doesn't. The Supreme Court does not have any governing body or code of conduct that they themselves must follow. Supreme Court justices in the past, specifically Ryan Quest and even Chief Justice Roberts, has said that they will consult what the lower federal court judges will use as a code of conduct, but there's nothing binding there. And we've seen this before in the past with Justice Scalia and Justice Breyer taking these type of hospitality trips.
Private jets, lavish trips, and access to exclusive clubs, all provided to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas for more than 2 decades by a Dallas businessman and Republican megadonor. That's according to exclusive reporting today by ProPublica. The luxury trips around the globe were valued in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and all went unreported on Justice Thomas's financial disclosures.
Then comes the other White House theme that keeps colliding with Republican messaging: climate. This is where the famous tooth fairy exchange matters. Whitehouse's approach to climate isn't just moral or environmental. He has repeatedly tried to drag the issue into the language conservatives claim to care most about: debt, deficits, insurance markets, mortgage risk, and systemic economic shock. In a Budget Committee hearing, Whitehouse warned that the 2008 crisis cost $4.4 trillion in lost revenue and $800 billion in extra spending, while pandemic response added $5.5 trillion to deficits. His point was stark. America has already learned what happens when government ignores systemic risk. He also cited a Deloitte projection that climate inaction could cost more than $220 trillion globally by 2070. That isn't Green New Deal poetry. That's balance sheet language.
We're going to begin with a series of hearings on the looming costs and economic risks of climate upheaval. Almost exactly 5 years ago, I sent around this binder to all of my Senate colleagues, in which I compiled some of the most compelling warnings about the economic risks associated with climate change. Last week, I sent your staffs an updated version of the binder. Here it is. As you can see, the warnings keep piling up. Have fun with the light reading. These warnings come from central bankers, economists, asset managers, insurance companies, investment banks, credit rating agencies, and leading management consultants, folks with a lot of credibility when it comes to economics, finance, corporate risk, and their effect on government spending and revenues. These will be our witnesses: economists, scientists, business leaders, and other financial and risk experts, many of whose work is in this binder. I've said that science provides the headlights for society, that it's scientists who illuminate the way for us to navigate into the future. Think of the economists and scientists we'll hear from as the headlights for the United States Congress as this committee helps navigate our long-term budget and fiscal priorities. Look at our national debt. One thing that stands out is how much of it was incurred as a result of exogenous shocks to the economy. Consider the 2008 financial crisis, which blew up the financial security of families and businesses across the country and reduced government revenues for a decade. 2 years after the recession, CBO found that projected revenues fell by $4.4 trillion and projected spending rose by $800 billion to spur that recovery. Consider the pandemic. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates that the federal response to the pandemic, which brought COVID under control, protected families, and jump-started our economic recovery, will add $5.5 trillion to our deficits. That doesn't factor in lost revenue or lost economic activity, so the total economic cost is actually higher. We came through both, but together those two exogenous shocks contributed $10 trillion to the federal debt, more than 40% of the total, proof of how catastrophic events can and do affect the federal budget and the economy, and how life has a way of upsetting best-laid plans and 10-year budget baselines. Headlights and better attention to what they illuminated could have helped. Plenty of financial experts saw the 2008 mortgage mess coming. Plenty of epidemiologists warned that the country was woefully unprepared for a pandemic. Now, we have all these warnings. Warnings of crashes in coastal property values as rising seas and more powerful storms hit the 30-year mortgage horizon. Warnings of insurance collapse from more frequent, intense, and unpredictable wildfires. A dangerous interplay between the insurance and mortgage markets hitting real estate markets across the country. Inflation from decreased agricultural yields, massive infrastructure demand, trouble in municipal bond markets, stranded assets, and a carbon bubble. The most dangerous risks are called systemic, meaning that they will cascade out into the broader economy as the mortgage problem did in 2008. And it's big. Deloitte predicts the differential between being responsible and reckless about climate could sum to more than $220 trillion globally between now and 2070. Some of these warned of risks are already upon us. Already, climate-related natural disasters increase federal spending on disaster assistance, flood insurance, crop insurance, and other programs we fund. But this is just the beginning. It will certainly get worse, much worse, particularly if warming exceeds 1.5 degrees. We are on a bad trajectory. It's time for us all to wake up and face the problem before coastal cities flood with water or Southwest cities can't get water. I hope we can fend that off with action if we snap into focus on the danger. We are all familiar with the tragedy of the Commons. In 2015, our opening witness, Dr. Carney, gave a speech entitled "The Tragedy of the Horizon," because some of the gravest dangers of climate change, which we could head off today, come to pass years or decades out. Rhode Island's coastline will be gone, reshaped into an archipelago by 2100, you say. Who cares? What's that? It's an eternity. Well, almost exactly a year ago, I became a grandfather for the first time. Baby Vera, God willing, will be alive in 2100. When I look at her, I'm looking at that future. Walk by any elementary school. The faces you see on the playground, God willing, will be alive in 2100. How will those little ones remember our less than greatest generation? We owe it to kids on playgrounds all across America to pay attention to get this right. By the end of this series of hearings, if we hear these expert witnesses, if we treat their testimony as our headlights, then our path, I hope, will be clear. Thank you, and let's get to work.
And that's what makes the tooth fairy moment so revealing. During the hearing, Senator John Kennedy went after climate witnesses with a line that instantly went viral. Do you believe in the tooth fairy, the Easter bunny, Jimmy Hoffa? It was classic cable-ready mockery. But buried inside that same exchange was a stunning admission of scale. One witness put the cost of making the U.S. carbon neutral by 2050 at about $50 trillion. Whitehouse's larger argument isn't that climate action is free. It's that pretending climate risk is fake is even more expensive. That's the difference in style. The mockery makes the clip. The numbers make the case. And Whitehouse has spent years trying to force those numbers into rooms that would rather stay theatrical. So when outlets frame Whitehouse as the senator who destroys right-wing talking points, what they're really reacting to is his method. He takes a Republican argument at face value, then follows the money, the documents, or the downstream costs. On Supreme Court ethics, he follows the gifts. On climate, he follows the budget exposure. On GOP attacks around ESG and fossil fuel politics, he follows the dark money. In another set of speeches and hearings, Whitehouse has explicitly argued that fossil fuel-funded obstruction is creating systemic risk for the economy. That's the through line connecting these stories. The outrage isn't random. It's organized around who profits, who escapes scrutiny, and who gets stuck with the bill when the talking points collapse. That's also why Lindsey Graham works so well as the opening villain in a story like this. He represents the kind of politics Whitehouse is built to answer: confident, combative, media-ready, and often light on public cost accounting. Whether the subject is military escalation, court accountability, or climate risk, Whitehouse's appeal to viewers is that he sounds like someone trying to force the hidden invoice onto the screen. That doesn't mean every Whitehouse argument wins instantly in Washington. It means he understands a new media rule better than most senators do. If you want people to remember the speech, give them the quote. If you want them to trust the speech, give them the evidence. In the end, the viral title works because it captures a real political hunger. People are tired of watching public officials speak in slogans while the actual evidence sits off screen. Whitehouse's brand, for better or worse, is dragging that evidence back into frame. And when he goes after figures like Lindsey Graham, he's not just attacking a senator. He's attacking a style of power. Escalate first, explain later. Take the perks, dodge the rules, mock the warnings, socialize the costs. That's why these clips hit. They don't feel like random partisan sparring. They feel like an audit. And in a media environment drowning in performance, the politician who brings receipts is always going to look like the one who landed the punch.